Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Joel Levey. So Joel, I first met at the Wisdom 2.0 conference in, I believe it was San Francisco. And he and his wife, his radiant wife, Michelle, was there. And they just stood out to me. They were glowing. There was something about them. And they were just sitting there kind of humbly listening to the speakers. And I had no idea who they were, but I was drawn to them. I just went, who are these people? And I just thought, I have to be friends with these people. So I made friends with them at the conference. We chatted in a few breaks. It was a few years ago. And I started finding out more about Joel and Michelle. And turns out Joel is an absolute elder in this field. Like, I'm really honored to have him on the show today. And I started finding out that he was one of the real pioneers of contemplative science. So measuring mindfulness, the whole mindfulness rather than just meditation movement, compassionate science, working in business and sports and government, and bringing these alternative practices. And this was in like 1864 or something. This was kind of back in the day. Joel was doing this way before a lot of the people who are now the big names in the field. He was leading the way with his wife. He's the founder of Wisdom at Work, author of many books. He's on the faculty of the Minnesota Medical School, various other organizations and things. It'd take me an hour to tell everything he's done. So I just want to say, Joel, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to see you again. And I do remember when we first met and just the kind of spark of mutual curiosity and interest that was there.
You stood out and I thought, this guy has done something. And then I found out there was 3-year retreats and, incredible in-depth practice. And I was like, okay, that was one of those times it reassured me that practice works. Like, there's something about embodied and meditative practice which shows. And seeing the relationship you had with your wife was also an inspiration for me, that a relationship could be so conscious. They're the two things that I remember, and it really inspired me.
Well, I think, we've all had experiences of being in the presence of somebody who's really done a lot of deep cultivation. And there's a coherence there. If you take just a simple analogy of like a light bulb and a laser beam, an ordinary incandescent light bulb pumping out random bursts of photons in a chaotic kind of manner versus a laser beam. You could have a 10-watt light bulb and a 10-watt laser beam, and there's incredible power difference and qualitative difference to that. And I think, when we're in the presence of people who have done a lot of deep cultivation, or who are really deeply somatically grounded or energetically savvy, there is a coherence, which I think is a kind of light, a kind of vibration. And there is a kind of magnetism to that. People want to be close to that. I remember, kind of a fun story from the old days. First year that the Naropa Institute was open, 1974, I remember I was there one morning, like at dawn, out in the park doing Tai Chi. And I finished the set, and I just, did that final move of closing the form, and was just standing there in the vibrancy of that moment. And I sensed a presence, and there was just this beautiful young woman kind of snuggling in close to me. And she says, I just want to stand in your space. I just want to be close to whatever this glow is. So I think, we see this with leaders in organizations, or secretaries, or admins, or baristas that just have a vibe.
Yeah, want to be around, as you say.
It gives us something to true to. It's just, wow, I really want to have the kind of strong, calm center that Mark carries, or that kind of vibrancy or glow or whatever it may be. So in that, I think, is a real reminder to us that whatever practice we're doing, whatever kind of cultivation or tradition that we're working in, that ultimately, the motivation is that we're not doing it for our own narcissistic, sorry-ass self, our own stressed, neurotic self to get a stronger ego. We're doing that in order to generate a stronger field of positive influence in the world.
Yeah. And let's start at the beginning then, because I know you're doing some really interesting stuff now, but I'd really like to hear a bit about your own story. How did you first get introduced to the body?
Well, the body piece is interesting. The energetic really opened up for me before the kind of fleshy, kind of meat body dimension opened up. I was probably about 15. 15 years old. I walked into to school, first day of that semester, and my teacher was sitting cross-legged on her desk, burning incense and talking about meditation. And I'd grown up in a family with a lot of suffering, but also a lot of kind of deep contemplative practice that never was really laid on me. It was just the field that I grew up in, but there was always this kind of impetus to just kind of deepen in my capacity to be tuned into the circumstances that I was in the midst of and to be able to respond in a helpful way. And I think because of just the quality of the intensity of my motivation, as I started to cultivate through some of the contemplative practices, what really opened for me was a sense of just, vibrancy and energy. I'd sit in class and watch sparks flying between my fingers, and people, I think, in those days probably thought I was stoned a lot of the time. I was just in wonder saying, what is this stuff? And it clearly had a base in the physical dimension. It was sort of like the magnetic field that comes from the magnet. But as I got deeper and deeper into an energetic sense of things, then that led to more awareness of the body and the movement of the body and the movement of the mind through the body, which then led me into seeking out in those days, one of the 2 yoga teachers in Seattle, if you can imagine that.
When was this? Just because I want to place you really in time here, because you're an extremely early adopter of a lot of this technology.
Yeah. So as a young friend that I was with at one point said, how old were you when you got activated? I got activated when I was 15. That was when I walked into that class and kind of started going, oh, meditation, yes, and then energy, and then embodiment, and then yoga, and Tai Chi, and Qigong, and Bakwa, and on it goes, and biofeedback, and neurofeedback. So first kind of activation, 1968, 1971, found out that there were 2 yoga teachers in Seattle, and met one of them who I started studying with at University of Washington. And on we go from there. From there I was sort of drawn into, after deciding I wasn't going to do medicine or philosophy, or I found my way gravitating towards psychology and ended up being the lab technician in the consciousness research area in the psych department, where, needless to say, early 70s, it was a colorful time to be studying consciousness.
Yeah, and you were one of the early adopters of using technology, and this came full circle to me recently when I was using my Muse headband, which is a kind of EEG measuring headband, and there you were on the meditation instructions. And I was like, oh, it's my friend Joel, but because that technology now is relatively cheap and easily available, but it's come a long way since the 70s, right?
Oh, yeah. When I first started doing neurofeedback and biofeedback, we'd have like 12-channel Beckman EEGs with ink pens spitting ink all over paper. It was sort of like archaic. And then we got oscilloscopes, and that was so cool. And now I'm walking around and I've got, like a lab with, in those days, what might have been hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of technology. I'm walking around with it on my MacBook Pro or my iPhone. And it's amazing. It's like the tech dude in me is dream to just have this stuff so accessible and so easy to hook up. And on the neurofeedback, biofeedback piece of it, just to me, I think, the integration of the neurofeedback and biofeedback technology with contemplative science and contemplative practice and energy practices putting those two together, I think, is like the ultimate integration of inner technology and outer technology.
Yeah.
And it can so accelerate the learning both on the text side and on the contemplative and the somatic side, because you're getting immediate feedback.
Yeah,
and
that's the beauty,
through that feedback, you can learn to accelerate the refinement of awareness to subtler and subtler and subtler levels.
Yeah, for me, the beauty of, say, this headband I'm using is as soon as I stop concentrating, the app starts making a noise. And in the case of this app, it's wave sound, starts getting kind of rougher and louder. And it just immediately, oh, okay, back to the breath. I was thinking about my dinner, you know? And like that immediate feedback, it could have taken me 1 or 2 minutes to spot that if I was just sitting on my own. And
or you could have just drifted off for a half hour or so and just been lost in your thoughts and not know. In some varieties of Zen practice, when you're sitting, there's a person in the role of JiggaJitsu who walks up and down the rows carrying a bamboo sword, and if anybody starts to drift off and start nodding or bouncing during the meditation, JiggaJitsu will come over and stand in front of them and bow, and if you're awake enough, you'll sense their presence and bow back, and then they'll take their sword and rest it on your shoulder, which if you haven't woken up yet will get your attention. And then you bow, and then they'll whack you a few times, and it's kind of like free Starbucks for your meditation, just to give you that whoosh of adrenaline to then, carry on really meditating on purpose rather than doing really sloppy, kind of sleepy dog, mind-wandering, drooling practice, which has nothing to do with meditation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a new idea in a way. Like I've heard of, people meditating with incense sticks between their toes, or different ways, or holding a candle. So if you go to sleep, you drop it, or holding a bowl of water. There's been various kind of things attempted, but obviously this new technology is, I'm aware that some people listening to this may be a bit anti-technology. I've had dirty looks at my Fitbit when I've been in some embodiment classes. Like, hey, if you are really embodied, you should be able to feel. You don't need anything to measure that. There is definitely an anti-technology stream amongst some meditators and body people.
Yeah, I think different styles. We've all got different playlists on our devices, and different times, we're kind of grooving to different kinds of beats. So I think, there's times where you refine, and then maybe you play with your toys and your devices, and it gives you affirmation and confirmation, and maybe a bit further refinement, fine-tunement. And then you set it aside for a while, and you just do the inner cultivation, and then maybe you drift back to using your devices or your apps again, and kind of refine again. So there can be an oscillation or different phases in our lives. I don't think, it's really a value judgment. I've done biofeedback. I remember doing biofeedback training with a Tibetan doctor at one point. I was curious about it. And at one point he just laughed and he said, this is just like meditation. When you try to do it, it doesn't work, so I love, hanging out with the lamas and, people that are very, oftentimes very advanced in their practice, who still have some curiosity of what's this all about, and can we use this to help people? So again, back to that motivation. Are we doing it just for ourselves, or are we doing it in order to, expand the range of our capacity to be in the presence of other living, stressed out beings with fathomless potential yet to be realized, and know which apps to recommend, or what practices or teachers that might be beneficial. So for me, I think for anybody who's got a real strong sense of that bodhisattva spirit and wish to help people and kind of innate altruism, then just having a broad familiarity of methodologies really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I guess one of the advantages of this measuring mindfulness is it actually makes it accessible to a whole new generation of people, a whole new type of person, in that before people like yourself and later Kabat-Zinn and other people came along, it was difficult to kind of approach, say, government or military or business with mindfulness, whereas at a certain point you had the data and you can say, look, this is the facts here.
Yeah. And I think, one exercise I love to do with groups of people is and your listeners could try this, is just reach out with one hand and hold everything you understand or that you can measure and that you have mastery of, in any of those categories. And with the other hand, reach out and hold everything that is you can't measure and that's mysterious and that you don't understand completely, and just appreciate the relativity between those two clusters of phenomena or experience. To appreciate, what we're measuring with fMRIs and heart rate variability or whatever we're measuring around mindfulness or contemplative practice, is just like a faint shadow of the real deep essence of the experience. It's a correlation, but the deeper, juicier, more essential, mysterious, powerful dimensions of this stuff, we're not going to be able to. I really don't think we're going to be able to measure those. We'll find interesting correlations of quiet brains where the default mechanism network quiets down and we dissolve out of the illusion of a separate self into the vastitude of our true, boundless, universal field of being that's shared by all things and all beings. We can measure, those kind of neurological thresholds associated with that experience of boundlessness or selflessness or wholeness. But those measures are such a faint shadow of what the actual experience is. But it's fascinating. I mean, our capacity for creative measurement related to contemplative science has grown enormously. I remember, when I first started doing research, you could literally read every research study that was done at that point. And you could read every book in English that had been translated from some wisdom tradition into English. And, we had a library in the lab that was maybe 6 feet wide and 6 feet tall. And that was the state of the art at that point. And now there's so much. And I think the challenge for those of us trying to navigate in these modern times is just how do we have the discernment to make wise choices and find good teachers and really good methods and resources.
Yeah, I think it's one of the missions of this podcast is like discernment and integration. And we've had this conversation with previous guests who have been around a while, and they've said, look, back in the 60s and 70s, you just couldn't find a teacher. Or as you said, there was 2 yoga teachers in all of a big city like Seattle. And then now the problem is there's 2,000, but how do you find the 2 good ones? It's a different challenge.
Yeah, it's very much like that. And, back in the old days, we would navigate through our social networks. It's just, we'd be out scouting and somebody would find a good teacher and say, whoa, you've got to go sit a retreat with this teacher, or try this practice or what have you. So I think, it was a very discerning bunch of friends in those days. Now I think, it's sort of like the medicine and the mindfulness are much more widely diffused and many more people have been inoculated or have some familiarity, but the depth of practice isn't nearly as full on or as deep as it was amongst the few people practicing, I think, back in the old days. So that's kind of a trade-off in that.
Yeah, I mean, the qualification to be a mindfulness teacher now, I mean, there are people that do a quick course, maybe an 8-week course, and then, they go on a weekend retreat perhaps. And, certainly the kind of teachers who were teaching the first mindfulness teachers in the 60s and 70s have done, extended monastic stays. I mean, you've done some pretty long retreats yourself, right?
Yes. And that makes a difference. It's not just the quality is correlated with the quantity of practice, but there's a lot to be said for that. And I think to honor that somebody who, with the right motivation and sincerity and practice and latency, may do an 8-week class and a few short retreats, and they want to help. And there is a circle of people who they know more than, and they can generously share with them and inspire them and activate their interest and kind of get them thirsty for more. And then, those people may want to go seek out more qualified teachers. So I know for me, I'm super grateful that I just had the dedication and the capacity and the thirst for learning that led me to, just go off for months at a time. Or, at one point, Michelle and I sat a year-long silent retreat with a remarkable man named Genlam Rinpoche, who was a teacher for the Dalai Lama and a Lama who'd spent 17 years in the Himalayas and his retreats. We had a chance to do a year-long silent retreat with him and a small group of people as part of the first Shamatha project. And that really, that kind of deep, intensive practice, be it a weekend or a week or 10 days or a month or a year or a 3-year retreat, that kind of practice, allows you to really, burn new circuits and pathways in the brain, sort of like if you were a musician and you had a chance to disappear for a year with your instrument with an incredible maestro who could help you refine your grooves. And it was silent, and your only job was to just, be able to deepen in your familiarity with your instrument and your music in order to be able to come out of a retreat and be such a force of it for good and inspiration that everybody you'd encounter would get excited about their potentials to play music. I think it's that kind of motivation and intensity of practice that can really make a difference.
And how is it to be silent for a year? What's it like in that process and coming out of it?
For both Michelle and I think it was the quickest year of our lives. In fact, we did a survey of the other retreatants at the end, and everybody agreed that subjectively the year had just flown by. I think, a good example of the relativity of temporal experience as the mind grows more concentrated. For us and for myself, it was fantastic just to have the opportunity to dive in that deep and not come up for air. And I'd walk in to see the Lama, for an interview now and then, and he'd look at me and he'd laugh and he'd say, "You were really made for this kind of lifestyle and practice." So for me, it was quite easy. Coming out was quite interesting. Michelle and I would be walking down the streets with pavement or in buildings with 60 cycle electricity because we'd been off the grid for a year out in the woods in this retreat center. And our main comment coming out of the retreat was, "This is very strange."
This is the one thing. I remember you telling me about the sort of how the land was covered in concrete and how weird that felt.
Yeah, it was interesting, but to also just have that fresh look at modern technological fast-paced life after having basically been living in a 3 meter by 3 meter room for a year and going out for a shower to get a begging bowl full of food from the kitchen couple times a day perhaps, and meditating 18 or 20 hours a day. It was magnificent to come back into the world and start talking again and realize, wow, we don't have to communicate just telepathically, because we've been sort of like in the zone where minds were open to each other like rooms in a house, in a boundless sort of way, and then we come back and it's like, oh, we can make these chirping sounds to each other that communicate meaning and love and information as well. Isn't that interesting? So it was quite fascinating.
And if it's okay to share, I remember you telling me a very cute story because your wife was actually not in the same building, right? She was next door. Is that right?
Yeah. So that was actually very tender, and your listeners might want to try this out with loved ones who maybe you're not in physical proximity with. One thing that both Michelle and I found ourselves saying after the year, even though we were cloistered and in separate rooms and silent. And, we'd give each other a hug on the path now and then, but that was about it. But in many ways, it was the most intimate year of our lives because we were connected at such a fathomless kind of essence level, sort of like Great Britain and Ireland and Iceland. If you go deep enough into each of those, and Japan, each of those islands shares a common substrate. And for us, that year was sort of like having dropped into substrate. So though we were physically and verbally not really in touch, we had made an agreement going into the retreat that at 5 o'clock every afternoon, we would just hold each other in our hearts, sort of like, merging hearts or merging soap bubbles, or just, really holding each other in a tender way in our hearts and infuse each other with our love. And that was such a wise and beautiful inspiration for us, and it led to such a profound sense of deep intimacy and mutual nourishment, especially on long days of meditation that were maybe a bit arduous, just to have this window of time each day just to bathe in the sweetness of the love we share was quite profound, and I think a very bonding experience, which as we do most of our work together as we wander around the world teaching and consulting, and but sometimes when we're physically separate, we'll just set a time each day and we'll meet up in that way, or we'll say, let's just hold each other in our hearts every hour on the hour and just kind of move back into that space of one-heartedness together. It's a beautiful practice, which I highly recommend for anyone who holds others dear.
Yeah, in many ways, I think when I met you and your wife, I was just so impressed by how tender and playful and together yet independent you were. And you became kind of one of my models of relationship, actually. I remember thinking, I want to be in a growth relationship like that. That's what I remember thinking as a then single guy at the time, and looking at you guys. And so thank you, Joel. You were one of the kind of inspirations for me.
Wonderful. That means a lot, Mark. Just knowing what a fierce and independent spirit that you are, and I think both Michelle and I are really happy now that you've found a love to share. And needless to say, it's hard, deep, humbling work, but it really is precious to find somebody who you can share the journey with and inspire each other's evolution and awakening.
Do you think there's a bit of a tension there between the kind of old-fashioned, celibate monastic ideal and then this idea of conscious relationship?
I think, again, different styles, different options. There are many historical and ancient precedents for, really precious, deep, devoted spiritual relationships. And there's a strong precedent for monasticism and just that kind of simplicity and intimacy in that kind of way. And I don't know that one is better or worse. Different people, different inclinations, different propensities. It's hard to maintain a monastic practice in Western culture in many ways, in a healthy way or a sustainable way. So, I think they're both viable options, and probably all the shades of gradients in between, or oscillations between. So, yeah.
I increasingly have been involved in sort of meaning at work, conscious business. So maybe let's go to that kind of relationship, the financial relationships of the world. Yeah. Often it seems like, I think this has changed in the last 10 years, but it used to be that spirituality in business or spirituality and even work, any kind of work, was almost considered at odds. And you were very early days working in business with, what was it, Sportsmind, the company.
Yes.
And now right at the forefront of at the Brighton Meaning of Work conference and other things, taking this into the House of Parliament, all sorts of ways you've taken this into government, business, sports. But let's focus a little bit on the work and the business side for a little bit.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, one of the ultimate art forms and achievements, I think, is to build a thriving community or a thriving organizational culture that is a force for good in the world. There are many organizations that have the spirit of a just, dominating, greedy, narcissistic organization, just that is just trying to exploit and gather resources for no particularly legitimately good end that would be a benefit for people at this time or in the future. But I think, that to have a kind of deep, meaningful, purpose-driven organization with deeply spirited leaders that are more intent on legacy and being a force for good rather than just merely profits. I think if you look at a lot of the data and the statistics on conscious capitalism and different variations on purpose-driven or values-driven business, there are some compelling correlations between the presence of more expansive motivation or intention or level of consciousness in an organization and their financial viability. I don't have those stats handy at the moment, but they're not hard to find that show that the profitability and the sustainability of organizations with a larger sense of purpose and mission may actually be more profitable in the long run. I think that's worth taking a look at. Many of the projects that we've worked with that have been it created the biggest ripples, the tsunamis of benefit have been initiated by leaders who are really intent on leaving a legacy. And when people describe the kind of work Michelle and I do and the kind of impact we've had in organizations, one of the words that is used most frequently is ripples, that there are ripples of benefit. Like we've been working with a medical group in Sussex, based in Brighton, in the UK, for the last 5 years or so, and they rebranded themselves from Brighton Hove Integrated Care Service to be here, as in we're here for you. And their mission is Care Unbound. And last year they were recognized as the most outstanding social social enterprise organization in the UK out of 80,000 other organizations. And I think it was just such a beautiful recognition of the kinds of ripples that they were creating, from serving a million people in the Sussex area to then serving 5 million people throughout the UK through the work that they're doing. It's just a really inspiring example that is geographically close to home for you.
Yeah. I've been working locally. I mean, I remember a question I asked at the conference where we met was, there's a risk of kind of prostituting ourselves to a sick system, or I think as I posed the question at the time, putting knives in the hands of dangerous children. I mean, do you think there's any risks in the case of the care service? I'm not necessarily seeing that, but in certain organizations, I mean, there's real ethical issues that come up, right?
Yeah, there are. And I think, there's two sides to that. One is, in any organization, no matter how toxic or destructive there may be, you're dealing with human beings. And, even though we may be very armored and very harmful and toxic and what have you, at the core, there is a goodness and a profound potential that's there for doing good. So, going into the halls of power, carrying a lot of light, there is the potential that we can begin to encourage or activate greater emergence of a greater ethical or moral intelligence, or a greater courage to question or change the system. And I've seen examples of places and circumstances where that has been operative and wise. I think there's also the danger of just giving. Yeah, I remember we were invited into one really large tech company in Silicon Valley at one point, and they were going through an SAP conversion. They had an aggressive schedule, and they literally brought us in with the mission to teach people skills so that people would not die at their desk working long hours over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're going, okay, am I enabling would be the word from addiction recovery? Am I an enabler?
Yeah, and it was just such a disgusting charter. And at the same time, a friend who's working there in human resources said, look, you guys are the ones for the job here, and you may save a few lives. And we came in and we did it. And, as a long-term relationship, working with an organization with that kind of motivation, it gets a little squeaky. But again, I think one of the most important things is that as resource people carrying the medicine and the technology of mindfulness or resilience training or embodiment into organizations, we need to continually be looking at checking our own motivation and what's driving us. Are we doing this just, to put some more cash in the bank, or, to fuel our ego? What's the highest, deepest, truest, most altruistic motivation that we can find? And that we also really need to be able to listen to our own inner guidance system, which I think is like the pinnacle of embodied training, is that we can so deeply trust the energetic embodied guidance that comes to us, whether this one's for us or not, and that there's a knowing in the body of what is right and what is less than right, or just simply not right for us at any given time. And I think at some very deep level, that's like a pinnacle of somatic training, to get to that point where the body becomes our guide in that way.
Yeah, the somatic radar, the somatic kind of ethical radar of the body, of the sense of opening, and this is a beautiful thing. It's really going to help people, or the closing of, this doesn't feel quite right. And for me, that somatic sense combined with, I always like to combine that with a kind of set of external ethical rules and an ethical community.
Yes.
I find that combination of community guidelines or rules and somatic sense is the kind of most reliable, because I can kind of fool myself with the inner kind of sense, and, and the rules on their own can get a bit rigid. And so I find that sort of combination to be the kind of the ideal for me.
Yeah. As you said, we started doing the inner cultivation work in the 60s, and then started working in organizations carrying variations of this work in the 70s, when we honestly knew of nobody else doing it. One of the greatest inspirations for us over the years has just been seeing organizations just blossom and flourish. I remember I was walking around corporate headquarters of a large tech firm at one point. And I used to go in, work with teams and, facilitate sessions and a lot of cross-disciplinary stuff. I'd do that maybe for 4 days a week. And then on the 5th day, I'd just walk around and do pulse checks and talk to people and hang out in the cafeteria, or just walk around the halls and see who I bumped into and check in on people I was mentoring or coaching in various kinds of ways. I remember one day walking around in this place and just almost having tears in my eyes with this sense that there was so much love here. And we walked into this organization with thousands of people, and it was severely broken when we came in. It was like warring factions with heavily siloed power structures. And after a year, 2 years of working there, top to bottom, with thousands of people who we really grew to know in very deep ways, to see what they had created in terms of a flourishing environment where there was so much loving support and there was so much dynamism and excitement and creativity and safety in the work they were doing. And it's just, seeing that again and again and again in dozens and dozens of organizations has been, I'd say a greater reward and sense of fulfillment than any big check that has ever been wired to my account.
I think it is nice to know that that's possible and to see that in operation. And these things are complicated and multi-sided. And I see a maturity coming to this conversation now,
Mark, one thing, going back to the intensive experience piece and knowing that you're based in the UK, I'd like to just put in a plug for, we over the last 5-6 years or so, we found that we've been asked by more and more people to mentor them or to help them develop their capacities to do deeper work on themselves and in the world. And what we've developed is a year-long program called a learning expedition, and that meets for a year. Sometimes we'll extend it to maybe 14 or 15 months. And we're planning to launch a new learning expedition in the UK in early 2019. And if people are interested in information on that, they could go to wisdomatwork.com, and just scroll down on the right side of the homepage, and there's a graphic with some information on the UK learning expedition.
I'll share that link as well. That's no problem. I was looking at that before I came on. I've got it up here, and it looks very cool.
And I think, just this model of developing learning communities where there's a sense of intimacy and safety and learning, and with a juicy curriculum that is working, continuously over time, reading, studying, practicing, integrating the somatic, the psychological, the spiritual, the energetic dimensions of this. We found this just to be just a profoundly nourishing vehicle for us as elders in this work to, in a sense, pass our legacy on, but also, again, to just see the magnificence of the quality of experience of a community of people really practicing deeply together and supporting each other in this kind of way.
Beautiful, beautiful. Is there anything else that's really kind of hot or on top or front of your awareness right now?
We have a learning center on the Big Island of Hawaii, fortunately far from the just profound power of the eruptions and the lava flows going on there right now. But we're in the far north, which is, rolling green hills and vast views of the ocean, and just a great place to let the clouds teach you about embodiment and qigong and the trade winds and movement. And for us, I think just the sheer artistry of working with natural elements and building and planting and community, that's been a wonderful learning laboratory for us, and also to share. So, perhaps you could bring a bunch of your mates from the UK and Europe over at some point, and we could do some kind of an adventure or program over there. It's a fantastic,
twist my arm for Hawaii,
place to
Joel.
play.
I'm sure it'll be tough to convince Daria to come to Hawaii for a little expedition. Twist my arm, man. I've had enough of the snows of Moscow. It's time for something warm. Okay. I mean, you've got so much experience, and I find myself actually at a loss, like what to ask you about in the last kind of 10 minutes of chatting. I mean, like just basically anything you want to talk about, man, I'm happy to hear about.
Well, I think, a couple of things come to mind. One is this notion that as we train our minds, we change our brains. That where attention goes, neural firing flows and neural connections grow, and to realize as we're doing a Tai Chi form or a kata, or we're doing a meditation practice, that that as we focus our attention, that we're activating certain neural circuits, and that those neural circuits grow stronger connections, and energy and information begins to flow through them in a different kind of way. So that, as we dedicate ourselves to deeper and deeper training, we're literally changing the physical and the energetic architecture of the vehicle that we inhabit to do better work.
Mm.
And I think, that it's not just all in our heads. I think that's one really important piece for people to understand. The other is, I think, that we live in what the Army War College used to call and still calls VUCA times. These are times of just increasing volatility and uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. And whereas perhaps back in the 60s or the 50s, when the VUCA-ness of things wasn't as high and the complexity and the intensity of things weren't as just overwhelming, maybe some of these kinds of cultivation practices were more optional. But
I think they've become almost essential now, haven't they? It's become like it was a nice to have, and now it's like you're going to go fucking crazy if you don't do this.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. It's just like, how on earth do you think you're going to survive, or the people in your organization are really going to survive and thrive, unless we really invest the energy, time, and practice and resources in developing capacity? And you're not going to get that in a once a week lunchtime meditation. It's like, this is serious stuff in terms of, just like bodybuilding. If you go work out on Saturday morning, that's sweet, but nice. Get serious.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about. I was talking to a business coach friend of mine yesterday. She works in Europe at pretty high levels, and we both agreed that all our clients, even in the space of say the 5 years since we've met, all our clients have got more and more crazy, more and more mental, more and more fast. More, our lives are packed. People are packed fast and busy and packed out and connected like never before. And, I'm personally stepping back for this to go on a bit of a retreat and to have a sabbatical, just because I kind of want out of the madness for a few months. I almost want to make a stand and say, you know what, it is possible to step out of this madness. Because otherwise I feel like I don't have integrity talking to my clients. But what I'm really thinking at the moment is it sustainable in any way? Like this current pace, connectedness and fullness of the modern workplace, modern life more generally. I mean, even with, the mindfulness at work and as you say, like an hour of meditation or 10 minutes of meditation once a week or something, it just strikes me that something more fundamental is being not just called for, but demanded.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree. And yet the trend in organizations is just to kind of spread it light and thin and kind of inoculate people without going for depth. So I think there's like 3 or 4 levels here. One is, as you said, you must just be bonkers if you think you're going to survive with this complexity going up without establishing a strong practice.
Yeah.
So get with the program. The other is, as we do engage and develop capacity, wonderful. It's going to reduce our stress and increase our resiliency and make sustainability more possible for us.
Yeah.
But I think the ultimate level with this kind of work is when you get groups of people working in R&D or working with compelling missions to find solutions to gnarly, complex problems facing humanity. And you teach them together really how to drop the bottom out of the system and go into the deep mind.
Yeah.
Go into that dimension of connectivity and creativity that infuses all things and all beings that we can source from, and do that, like in astronomy, where you've got a group of like clusters of small antennas that are gathering photons and waveforms from the sky and assembling those into a more higher resolution image that each, when the organizations where we've done this kind of work, where leaders and research teams start to understand, whoa, there's a whole nother level of technology that we need to bring to our research and to our labs. And this is inner technology. And if we equip groups of people working with these huge potential ripples of effect and benefit, and help them learn how to drop in together and to hold profound questions and to source inspiration and bring it forth, share it and work it, take it back to the lab, go to their databases, come back into meditation, work it some more, oscillate between deep inner work, and then using every tool we have available. I think that's at an organizational and a global and a humanity scale, I think the best use of wetware and silicon that we've got.
Beautiful. Joel, that feels like a really nice place to start wrapping this up. That was profound. I knew you'd be deep and beautiful yet accessible as ever, Joel. So this has been fabulous. And in terms of finding more about your work, there's wisdomatwork.com, right?
Right. And that's the best place to go. If people go there and you just sort of look down the right side of the page, that usually just has some graphics with words that invite people to explore. Like, we're taking a group of people on a wisdom adventure to Bhutan in September, and then also stopping off and doing a wisdom tour of Thailand. We're doing the UK learning expedition and an executive learning expedition in Europe starting in early 2019. We've got Hawaii. We welcome invitations. We work all over the world, and we welcome invitations to get into meaningful mischief with colleagues and cohorts of people in different places where the wisdom and the expertise that we have, which is rather unusual and long-standing, where that might be valued and helpful. So please, if you're listening to this and you're curious, go to wisdomatwork.com, wisdomatwork.com. If nothing else, you can subscribe to we send out some words of wisdom every day. You can sign up for that and stay in touch. And we welcome your inspirations or your questions.
Joel, I was so happy when I saw that you were the person they brought into the House of Commons with the talks of government. So I thought, okay, they've got the real fucking deal here. They haven't been blagged by some mindfulness lightweight. This is the real deal. So the aged whiskey of mindfulness is how I think of you. So
wow, we might put that on the website. I love that.
Yeah, you can quote me on that, man. Put that on your website. Joel, final.
As we wrap up here, I'd just like to do one last thing again in the spirit of ripples, and which is just the right way to end a conversation like this. If you'll indulge me for another 30 seconds or minute, and that would be to invite all of us, whether we're engaged in this conversation synchronously in this moment, or you're listening atemporally to a recording of this, just to pause as this experience comes to a conclusion, and just imagine that you can gather and breathe into you the waves of inspiration that are available for you, like waves of light or energy that you absorb and you gather, and then imagine and envision that you can dedicate those energies, like play them forward in the continuum of your awakening consciousness as like a light that will light your way forevermore. And envision that you can gather those positive energies and draw them into the core of your being, and that you can extend those as waves of encouragement and blessings of strength to all your loved ones, your colleagues, your friends. Just, to blow a little bit of this air into their tires, to give them the strength to carry on. And then a third wave of this, to gather this, and envision that this good energy, this positivity, this chi flows from your heart into the hearts of all beings everywhere, and the vastitude of infinite interconnection and wholeness that we're embedded within. And that as these energies flow from your heart, that they're received by each person, each being, wherever they may be, and they're received in the ways that each being most needs at this time to awaken more deeply and more fully to their true nature and their highest potentials.
Joel, a beautiful dedication. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon, give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. More than I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.